Hello, welcome back. Hope you're all doing well. Now, today's case is still very well known in the UK, even though it happened 10 years ago this year, back in 2010. There was 24-hour news coverage on this case as it happened, and this man's name became really quite infamous, and that man was Raoul Moat. This case has the most surreal twists and turns to it. Innocent people died and a maniac held the UK's full attention in the summer of 2010. Now, first of all, let me say this case has a ton of detail, and it got to the point where I had to start taking details out, else this video would have been 6 hours long, and no one wants to watch a 6-hour video of me talking. There's a lot more information out there on the internet if you want to find it, and I believe there's also a documentary coming up this summer, so make sure you look out for that. This case starts with a couple named Josephine and Peter. They live together with Josephine's son Angus from a previous relationship. The three of them are happy, and it's not long before Josephine falls pregnant with Peter's child. Unfortunately, their happiness is short-lived as their relationship becomes rocky. It takes a downward turn to the point where Peter leaves the family home and never returns. Josephine must carry on as a single parent, and she gives birth to her son on the 17th of June 1973, and she names her child Raoul Thomas Moat. She does not name Peter on the birth certificate. She leaves the father's name blank. Little Raoul doesn't have the best start in life. The family live in the Newcastle's West End, which is a deprived area. And Josephine is struggling with her mental health. She suffers from bipolar, so in her darkest moments it's said that sometimes she would beat Raoul, and on one occasion she burnt all of his toys in front of him. As Raoul gets a little older, he starts to ask about his absent father, but Josephine refuses to discuss him. She gives no details away. So Raoul fantasises instead that his father is French, because his mother was born in France. He imagines that he was born in France and creates a whole picture in his mind of what his father is like. In reality, little does Raoul know that Peter is trying to connect with him via Josephine, but Josephine will not let Peter into his life. She wants nothing to do with him. Peter later says that one of his biggest regrets was not being able to meet with Raoul, because he believes that he would have turned into a completely different person if he'd had a relationship with his father. Raoul's mother remarries to a man named Brian, and Brian and Raoul clash. They don't get on. So it's decided that Raoul should go and live with his grandmother. This seems like a suitable option because it's a stable environment, and his grandmother lives just down the road from his mother. But Raoul by this point is already a troubled boy. He feels unwanted and rejected, like he doesn't belong anywhere, and his frustrations manifest in him hurting animals and starting fires. By the time Raoul reaches 17, he has a new hobby, bodybuilding. He becomes obsessed with growing his muscles, and to supplement that he starts taking steroids. Now, some steroids can have a serious impact on your mental health, and for someone with already a complex, complicated mind as Raoul, the last thing he needed was to add potentially destructive chemicals into the mix, and unsurprisingly, his mental health takes a downward turn and he becomes a much more angry, aggressive person. Jumping forward a few years, and Raoul is 24 and he decides he wants nothing to do with his mother. He completely cuts her off, and even though she tries to make connections with him through the years, he wants nothing to do with her. So from this point they are essentially estranged. Raoul during this time dates a girl from Rothbury, and that location is important in this case, which is why I mention it. The two frequently spend time camping together in the woods of Rothbury. She describes Raoul as a practical joker and a nice guy, but that he can show a darker side. He once told her that he had fantasies of beating an enemy he had to death with a baseball bat. The two split, and Raoul takes a job as a nightclub doorman. Now, bearing in mind he's 6'3" and he's a bodybuilder, so this job is perfect for him. He looks suitably intimidating for anyone who might be looking to cause trouble on a night out. Meanwhile, Raoul also becomes a parent. He fathers two little girls who he wins custody of after he splits from their mother. But he's also really suffering with his mental health, probably in part due to the steroids. He experiences anger issues, paranoia, and he has terrible nightmares. Due to his anger and paranoia, Raoul starts to believe that social services are out to get him, so he starts recording every conversation he has with them to try to prove that they're conspiring against him. But it's not just social services. He also believes that the police are out to get him, and he absolutely despises them. Raoul sets up CCTV and records all of his phone calls with police and social services as he believes that they are out to get him. He also keeps a crossbow and an axe underneath his bed in case he needs them. The paranoia that Raoul has about the police stems from the fact that in 10 years he was arrested 12 times and it was always for low-level issues. He was never convicted. The police would pull him over just so they could check the fuel in his car or so they could check his tyres, and that just further made him think that they were out to get him. Jumping ahead a few years to 2004, and Raoul is now 31 years old and still working as a nightclub doorman. Waiting in the queue is Samantha Stobart, who is 16 years old. The two meet and they hit it off straight away and they start a relationship. Raoul meets Samantha's family and they welcome him. Even though there's a 15-year age gap, they seem to get on really well. But it wouldn't be long before the cracks started to show. Raoul becomes gradually more controlling of Samantha. He becomes emotionally and physically abusive. He tells her that she must wear makeup if she's to be seen out in public with him, and if she plans a night out, he makes sure he goes with her. His paranoia is such that there's no way he'd trust her on a night out on her own. Raoul becomes progressively more violent towards Samantha, throwing her against the wall, the impact damaging her head. He has this warped sense of right and wrong. He freely admits to slapping Samantha and throwing her around and roughing her up when necessary, but he never punches her. In his mind, if he doesn't punch her, then technically he's not a wife beater. Raoul blamed Samantha for every fight. He would say that he would try to be nice to her, but she would just push him so far that he'd have to lash out. He was a classic narcissist, manipulating every scenario to suit his narrative. During Raoul's bouts of violence, Samantha would escape to her grandmother's house and stay with her for a while, but every time Raoul would turn up and Samantha would agree to go back with him, thus starting the cycle again. Samantha then fell pregnant and gave birth to Raoul's daughter, but Raoul was just becoming more and more extreme in his behaviour. Raoul's extreme behaviour spilled over into his work, and so he had his doorman's licence taken from him, so he had to find work elsewhere, so he started up a tree surgeon business. Things with Samantha deteriorated even further, and it was the last straw for Samantha when Raoul was arrested for beating a child, and he was sent to prison for 18 weeks. Samantha saw this as her opportunity to be free from him, so she telephoned him in prison to tell him that it was over. Samantha begins a relationship with another man, Christopher Brown. Christopher has recently moved to the area looking for work as a karate instructor. He's nothing like Raoul. He's a decent, happy-go-lucky man who treats Samantha well. Samantha calls Raoul and tells him about Christopher. She says that he's a police officer, that he's strong and could take Raoul in a fight. Of course this isn't true. Christopher isn't a police officer, he never has been. She says it to Raoul in hopes that it'll deter him from coming to find them when he's released from prison. She hopes that him being a police officer might scare Raoul off, but knowing Raoul as we do, he despises the police. He has acute paranoia and extreme aggression, so telling Raoul that she's dating a police officer is like a red rag to a bull. Raoul's cellmates notice a change in Raoul from that day onwards. He's furious, and during his last days in jail, he becomes hell-bent on seeking his revenge. Whilst in prison, Raoul's friend Carl Ness spies on Samantha and reports back to him on her whereabouts and what she's up to with her new partner. If Raoul isn't already wound up enough, Carl Ness, playing detective for Raoul on the outside, only makes him 10 times worse. On the 1st of July 2010, Raoul, now 37 years old, has been released from Durham prison. He wants everyone to know what's on his mind, so on his Facebook he writes, "Just got out of jail. I've lost everything. I'm not 21 years old anymore. I can't rebuild my life. Watch and see what happens." Whilst he was in prison, Raoul had asked his friend Carl to get him a car with 6 wheels, which was code for a gun with 6 cartridges. So now Raoul is out of prison, Carl brings the gun round. Raoul modifies the cartridges. He adds lead fishing weights to them, which he knows will make them more destructive. Raoul is out to make as much damage as he possibly can. Raoul then goes to buy some camping equipment, which he knows he's going to need later on. Then he and Carl start searching the internet and making telephone calls, trying to find out the whereabouts of Samantha and her new boyfriend. They find that information out and Carl drives Raoul to that location and drops him off there. That evening on the 3rd of July 2010, Samantha and Chris are at a house party. Little do they know that sat outside next to a window listening to their discussion is Raoul Moat, holding his modified shotgun. He listens to their conversation and he overhears some of it. He hears his name mentioned and thinks that they're laughing about him and mocking him. He texts Carl saying, "They're slagging me off good and proper. Just watch, LOL. I'm going to kick off nice and proper when they come out." Of course, that wasn't the case at all. They were talking about him, but it's because they were scared. They knew he'd been released a few days before and that he might come looking for them. Chris asked the owner of the house if he had a baseball bat so that he could take that home with them in case Raoul appeared and tried to attack him. Chris and Samantha leave the house. Samantha spots Raoul straight away and Raoul shoots Chris. Chris staggers backwards and Raoul shoots him again and he falls to the floor. Raoul walks straight over to Chris, stands directly over him and shoots him at point blank range. Samantha then runs for her life back into the house, but Raoul follows her. She runs into the living room, but he shoots her through the living room window and hits her. Christopher Brown, after being shot at point blank range, dies at the scene. Samantha, who is still clinging to life, is rushed to hospital in a critical condition under armed guard. Raoul just walks away as if nothing has happened and leaves the scene to catch a taxi. The next morning, Raoul feels good. He feels relieved. He phones a friend bragging about what he's done, saying he feels full of beans and like a weight has been lifted from his shoulders. But the police are now aware of him and they are aware that a very dangerous man is on the loose and that they need to find him as soon as possible. They arrest 28 people trying to find him, but they get no leads and they've no idea where he is. On Sunday, July 4th, 24 hours after shooting Christopher and Samantha, Raoul rings Northumbria Police and declares war. He says, "Hello there, this is the gunman from Berkeley last night. My name is Raoul Moat. What I'm phoning about is to tell you exactly why I have done what I have done. My girlfriend has been having an affair behind my back with one of your officers, this gentleman that I shot last night. You'll get your chance to kill us, but I'm hunting for officers now. You police have took too much off me over the years. I'm coming to get you. I'm not on the run, I'm coming to get you. I've lost everything through you. You just won't leave us alone. I'm hunting for officers now." Just as a side note, if you're not from the UK, in the northeast of England we might say us when actually we mean me. So when he says you'll get your chance to kill us, what he's saying is you'll get your chance to kill me. It's the same thing. There's no one else involved. It's just him. He ends the call and he goes on the hunt with Carl Ness, and it's not long before he finds exactly what he's looking for, a police officer sat on his own in his car. The police officer is PC David Rathband. He is aware of Raoul, but he isn't aware that he's in Carl's car, which is a black Lexus. It's different to the car that Raoul was in earlier, so he doesn't recognise it and he's not looking for a black Lexus. At 12:45, Raoul gets out of his car and creeps up to the police vehicle. PC Rathband hears a noise and turns round to face the passenger window. Raoul is stood there and opens fire, and he shoots him directly in the face. He immediately blinds PC Rathband, and when he sees him move again, he shoots him again, and it's at this point PC Rathband realises that he needs to play dead, which he does. Raoul falls for it and walks away and leaves the scene. In the meantime, PC Rathband is able to use his last few moments of consciousness to radio in to say that he's been shot. Raoul straight away goes to a telephone and calls Northumbria Police again. He says, "This is Raoul, the Berkeley gunman. Are you taking us serious now? I've just downed your officer at the roundabout at the west end of Newcastle. I'm going to destroy a few lives like you've destroyed mine. This is what happens when you push, push, push. I tell you now, I'm absolutely not going to stop. You're going to have to kill me. I'm never going to stop." Then Raoul visits a friend's house, much to the friend's surprise, who does not expect to see him turn up at his door. He tries to get him to turn himself in, but he refuses. Instead, he hands over a 40-page murder statement, which is a letter that Raoul has written explaining what he's done and why he's done it. In the letter he says, "The crimes I have committed are to people who have wronged me in some way. All my life I've wanted death, hence the reason I took risks and made the worst kind of enemies. I will keep killing police until I am dead. They have hunted me for years. Now it's my turn." By this point, social media and news outlets have caught on to this case, and there is 24-hour rolling news coverage of it. I remember it well, and it would stay like that for days as this case became more and more intense. Northumbria Police at this point know that they've got a very dangerous man on the loose, and they host a press conference asking him directly to stop, but of course he's got no intention of stopping. In the meantime, Raoul is with his friend Carl, and another friend joins them, Karam. Raoul tells police that he's holding these two men hostage, so this ramps up the pressure on the police because not only now do they have to catch Raoul, they also have two hostages to take into consideration. Finally, on the 6th of July, police get a breakthrough in the case. Carl's black Lexus that the three men have been driving around in is found in Rothbury. Now, you may remember that I mentioned Rothbury earlier. That's the location that Raoul used to go camping to with his ex-girlfriend. It's a very beautiful, scenic location. There's lots of woods and fields around there. But because Raoul knows it well, that's why he's gone there. He's trying to maintain some sort of control over his situation. Near to the car, police find a makeshift campsite. It's clear the three men have been hiding there because they leave certain items behind. Letters wrote by Carl and Karam are found there, and those letters are written to their families, and they make it clear that they aren't hostages at all. They're there with Raoul out of their own free will. In one letter, Karam writes to his sister, "It's my friend that's holding me hostage. I'm actually safer than safe. I'm actually in a safe location out of harm's way. Burn this letter after you have read it." Whilst police are making this discovery, the three men decide to go their separate ways. Raoul goes one way and Carl and Karam go the other way. When Carl and Karam are walking down the road, a police helicopter spots them and they're taken in and arrested. It's thought that when Carl and Karam were arrested, Raoul was likely less than 100 yards away from them, but the police just didn't spot him. The next item found at the campsite is a voice recorder, and it features Raoul ranting to the police again. He mentions PC Rathband. He says, "I'm not fussed about not killing him. I didn't think I had killed him anyway. I was going to go along and finish him off, but that's not the point. He got 2 shots. At the end of the day, he's looking a bit of a mess." Raoul also makes a very disturbing threat in the recordings. He tells the police that for every story he reads about himself, he's willing to kill an innocent member of the public. He's fed up of seeing stories about him in the media. The reason Raoul is so furious is that the media are portraying him to be deranged. They say that he's killed family pets in front of his children. They also say he has cruel disciplinary methods, like making his children stand outside wearing jesters' hats and a sign around their neck that read "naughty." Raoul's own mother tells the press that he's better off dead at this point, so the press ran with that and printed it, and as you can imagine, for someone like Raoul reading something like that just makes him spiral even more. So what he's doing now is trying to take some control back by issuing threats to the public to make the press stop. So the police instruct a media blackout, preventing the press from printing any information about Raoul that he may take offence to. They're allowed to report on events as they happen, but just nothing about Raoul personally. In terms of the manhunt, police know that they don't have the resources to handle this alone. So they call in extra firearms officers from 18 police forces, and an RAF Tornado jet with heat-seeking equipment is brought in. It becomes one of the largest British police operations ever mounted. But even though the police have all of this extra resource, they are no further forward in finding Raoul. Raoul makes the most of his knowledge of Rothbury Woods. He knows that it's very rugged, dense terrain, so if he hides well enough, he knows that police helicopters won't be able to see him. Now, I said at the beginning of this video that there are a lot of surreal twists and turns to this case, and this is a prime example. Police call on the assistance of TV survival expert Ray Mears. If you don't know who he is, Ray Mears is a tracking and survival expert, and that's how he made his name on television. He's like the cosy dad version of Bear Grylls, less jumping into ice pools naked and more setting up campfires and living off the land, foraging for mushrooms and berries. Either way, he's very good at tracking, and so the police called him in to help them track Raoul Moat. So to track someone, you have to be familiar with the environment, and you have to be able to know when that environment has been changed. So bent over grass or broken twigs might suggest that someone's been there. Leaves are usually light brown on top and then dark brown underneath. So if someone's been walking through it, you won't necessarily see footprints, but you'll see a dark trail of where those leaves have been overturned and the dark sides are showing through. After 8 hours of searching, Ray thinks he finds some tracks made by Raoul, and he leads the police in that direction. It's thought that at one point they were only 20 feet away from where Raoul was standing, so Ray obviously knows what he's doing. Finally, at 7:25 p.m. on the 9th of July, Raoul shows himself to police. He emerges from the woods and slowly walks onto the riverbank. But he's not surrendering. He has his shotgun held to his head, and he has no intention of coming in quietly. Food and water is brought to him, and negotiators try desperately to encourage him to put the gun down and surrender. They've researched him thoroughly in an attempt to understand him and to try to persuade him that suicide isn't the answer. But it doesn't work. The gun never leaves his head. Even as he eats, he stays positioned in that way for hours, completely surrounded by armed police officers. Now, if you thought the Ray Mears thing was strange, This case gets even stranger now. Raoul is there, surrounded by police marksmen, when a message comes over the police radio. It says that former professional footballer Paul Gascoigne has turned up at the scene and wants to speak to Raoul Moat. Now, if you don't know who Paul Gascoigne is, he's also known as Gazza. He's a former professional footballer and he was very, very successful in the 90s, and he's from Newcastle, the same place that Raoul is from. Gazza has always been a very well-loved celebrity. He's known for being a cheeky chappy type, a comedic friendly guy, and without a doubt one of the most famous footballers in the UK. But sadly he's battled with alcoholism and drug problems for a lot of years now. So when people heard on the news that he turned up at the site of Raoul Moat's standoff, no one knew what to think. It was really strange, and I remember it happening and people just didn't know what was going on at this point. What had happened was, whilst the Raoul Moat standoff was taking place, Gazza had suffered a serious relapse and he was currently binging on a mixture of whiskey and cocaine. What happened was, as Gazza watched the news and the more drink and drugs he was taking, the more his brain was telling him that he knew Raoul personally. It started off that he was acquaintances, and then the more he ingested, the more he believed that they were actually great friends, and that if he could just get to the scene of where Raoul was, he'd be able to stop him and talk him out of it, and he could end all of it. Gazza turns up at the scene completely out of his mind on drink and drugs, live on television, wearing a dressing gown, holding a fishing rod, some chicken and 4 cans of lager. He genuinely believes that if he can just get to Raoul to talk to him, he can convince him to stop all of this and they can go fishing together. Unsurprisingly, the police tell Gazza to go home immediately, but what a strange sight it must have been for them to see, and what a bizarre twist to an already unpredictable chain of events. So 6 hours have passed and Raoul is still laid on the floor with a shotgun to his chin. It's clear that he's not going to hand himself in. It's raining, he's barely eaten, he hasn't slept, and the mood is changing. Police are able to tell that Raoul is bracing himself to put in place the final step in his plan, which is to end his own life. Now that's never a successful outcome for the police. They don't want that to happen. So they are looking for other options that they can do to try to stop Raoul from ending his life. And the option they choose to try to prevent Raoul from taking his own life is an X12 taser. This taser is unapproved by the government, but they receive last-minute authorisation to be able to use it. As with any taser gun, its purpose was to incapacitate Raoul, to stop him from being able to take his own life, and they can see that he's bracing himself. He's moving the gun from his chin to the side of his head. He's telling the police it ends in this field tonight. So they take their chance, and before he can shoot himself, they shoot him with the taser gun. Whilst the taser hits him, it doesn't actually affect Raoul, it doesn't incapacitate him, so he takes the chance while he has it. He lifts the gun to his head and at 1:15 a.m. he takes his own life. Raoul is immediately rushed into hospital, but nothing can be done for him, and 3 hours later Northumbria police announce on the 10th of July 2010 that Raoul Moat is dead. Raoul Moat's manhunt cost taxpayers over £1 million. So now Raoul is dead. And as much as he's gone, his actions are still impacting a lot of people's lives. There was a huge fallout from this. So firstly, let's not forget Carl and Karam, Raoul's 2 friends. They were the reason that Raoul was able to stay one step ahead of the police the whole time. Their actions contributed to absolutely everything that Raoul was able to do in those last 10 days that he was alive, and they needed to face punishment for that. The 2 men did go to trial in 2011 and it was really a cut and dry case. The police had CCTV evidence of Carl and Karam going shopping with Raoul to buy food shortly after he'd shot PC Rathband, laughing and joking together as if nothing had happened. They also supplied Raoul with a gun and they were also his getaway driver. They were implicit in absolutely everything that Raoul did in the last 10 days of his life. Following their trials, Carl Ness was found guilty of murdering Christopher Brown and the attempted murder of Samantha Stobart and PC Rathband. Even though he technically wasn't the one holding the gun, the jury considered him to be just as responsible, and Carl was given a minimum of 40 years. Karam Awan was found guilty of the attempted murder of David Rathband and was recommended to serve a minimum of 20 years. Carl Ness did launch an appeal to reduce his sentence, but 3 judges agreed that the sentence was acceptable and they dismissed his application. They said what he did was an exceptionally grave crime and his 40-year minimum sentence was suitable for what he did. It does make me wonder if Carl and Karam really thought through what it is that they were doing for longer than 5 seconds. They must have known that Raoul was planning to take his own life, and so he was essentially leaving them to deal with the consequences. They had no history of violence. It was as if they were just so easily manipulated by him that they were willing to do anything he asked. Social media took a sick turn after Raoul Moat died, and people started to look up to him as if he was some sort of hero, as if he'd stood up to the police after years of being victimised. Flowers and cards were left at his funeral, and sympathy pages were set up on Facebook that said, "R.I.P. Raoul Moat, you legend." It got so bad that it even made it to the Prime Minister's question time. David Cameron, who was the Prime Minister at the time, actually had to stand up and say, "It's absolutely clear that Raoul Moat was a callous murderer, full stop, end of story. I cannot understand any wave, however small, of public sympathy for this man. There should be sympathy for his victims and the havoc he wreaked in that community. There should be no sympathy for him." And I couldn't agree more. I hope in the way that I've presented this case, I've made it clear that Raoul Moat was a domestic abuser, he was a child abuser, he was a murderer, and he's ruined lives. There is nothing to look up to in Raoul Moat. As for PC Rathband, he did survive the shooting, but he was left completely blinded. He made an incredible recovery, and he was frequently on the local news telling his story and letting everyone know how he was adapting since the loss of his sight. He was even awarded a Pride of Britain award. David then went on to set up the Blue Lamp Foundation, which was a charity to help emergency service personnel injured in the line of duty, just like David was. But behind closed doors, David was struggling. Even though he'd survived so much and he'd gone through so much and been so strong, it all became too much for him, and he couldn't handle it anymore. And on the 29th of February 2012, just 19 months after Raoul Moat shot and blinded him, PC David Rathband took his own life. And I remember that was a huge shock when the news of that came through, especially for people in the northeast. He was always on the local news telling us about what he'd accomplished and how he was adapting, and it just goes to show that you don't know what's going on behind closed doors. Samantha Stobart thankfully survived, but she is of course scarred for life after Raoul's attack, and she lost her partner, Christopher Brown, who died in the attack. Christopher's mother said that she believes that Christopher gets lost in the background due to the fame of Raoul Moat. She said that he was a gentle, happy-go-lucky person who enjoyed his life. She said, "I still expect my son to ring me and tell me he's okay. Even now, life for me is just existing." At the end of all of this, 2 men lost their lives needlessly, Christopher Brown and PC David Rathband, and I think it's appropriate to end this case remembering them. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give me a like and subscribe. I've got a lot more videos planned and I'd love for you to stick around to see them. Have a great day and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.